What becomes of a king who never reigns? In 1483, England stood on a precipice. King Edward IV was gone, leaving his 12-year-old son, Edward V, to inherit a fractured and ambitious court. But a boy king needs a protector, a role immediately claimed by his uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. The young king and his even younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, were escorted to the Tower of London, ostensibly for their own safety in preparation for the coronation. It was a fortress of royal tradition, a palace as much as a stronghold. But the coronation never happened. The princes were seen playing in the gardens, then at the windows, and then not at all. They vanished from sight, swallowed by the stone walls and the political machinations of their time. Orchestrate their disappearance. Or does the truth lie hidden in the shadows of other powerful figures? For over 5 centuries, the fate of the princes in the tower has remained one of history's most compelling and chilling unsolved mysteries, a story of innocence lost in the brutal game of Thrones. The year 1483 began with England in a state of rare and precious tranquility. King Edward IV, the charismatic and formidable Yorkist monarch, had seemingly secured his dynasty's future after the brutal decades of the Wars of the Roses. His reign had brought stability, commerce flourished, and his 2 sons, the 12-year-old Prince Edward and the 9-year-old Richard, Duke of York, represented a seamless succession. But this hard-won peace was built on the singular strength of one man, and on April 9th, that foundation crumbled into dust. The king, still in his prime at just 40, fell gravely ill and died with shocking suddenness, plunging the entire kingdom into a state of profound shock and uncertainty. The sun had set on the House of York. His elder son was immediately proclaimed King Edward V, but a boy king was a vulnerable king. The court fractured overnight. On one side stood the queen's ambitious family, the Woodvilles, who had risen to prominence and wealth through royal favor and were deeply distrusted by the old nobility. They moved quickly to consolidate their power around the young monarch. On the other side was the late king's own brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, a battle-hardened and respected commander who had been named Lord Protector in his brother's will. From his seat of power in the north, Richard watched these developments with a keen and calculating eye. He understood that whoever controlled the king, controlled the kingdom. The stage was set for a confrontation, a subtle and dangerous game of political chess where the lives of 2 young princes were the ultimate prize. The air in London grew thick with whispers and suspicion as the powerful lords of the realm chose their sides, knowing that the fall of the lion meant the wolves were now free to hunt. A storm was gathering, and its epicenter was a child, who now wore a crown he was not yet strong enough to defend. The spring of 1483 carried a fragile hope that quickly soured. With King Edward VI passing, the intricate web of power he had woven began to unravel. His heir, the 12-year-old Edward VI, was journeying towards London, a boy poised to inherit a kingdom. He was surrounded by his mother's ambitious family, the Woodvilles, led by the cultured and capable Anthony Woodville, Earl Rivers. But another figure loomed large. The late Kingswell had appointed his younger brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, as Lord Protector, entrusting him with the realm's stability until the young king reached maturity. Richard, a veteran of the brutal Wars of the Roses, and a respected administrator in the north, saw the Woodville influence as a direct threat not only to his authority, but to the very fabric of the state. He would not wait for his enemies to act. With breathtaking speed and precision, Richard, accompanied by his powerful ally the Duke of Buckingham, rode to intercept the royal procession. At Stony Stratford, on a tense April morning, the 2 factions met. Richard, bowing low before his nephew the king, spoke of loyalty and duty, all while his men surrounded Earl Rivers and the king's other attendants. He painted a picture of a Woodville conspiracy, a plot to seize power and marginalize the old nobility. The accusations were a masterstroke of political theater. In a swift, decisive action, Earl Rivers and his key allies were arrested and taken away. The bewildered young king was now entirely in his uncle's custody. Richard assured the boy it was all for his protection, a necessary measure to secure his path to the throne. He then escorted Edward VI to London, not in a grand procession of a monarch, but as a ward under his uncle's watchful eye. The destination was the Tower of London, presented as a secure royal apartment to prepare for the coronation. As its heavy gates closed behind the young king, a new and unsettling chapter began. The protector had played his hand, and he had won the opening round. The spring of 1483 was a season of profound and chilling unease. While Edward V resided in the Tower of London, preparing for his coronation, the key player remained off the board. His younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, Duke of York, was sheltered with his mother within the sanctuary of Westminster Abbey. For the Lord Protector, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, this was an intolerable situation. The existence of a second heir outside his direct control, surrounded by the Queen Dowager's allies, represented a living symbol of opposition, a potential rallying point for the Woodville faction he sought to neutralize. The concept of sanctuary was a formidable medieval institution, a sacred line even powerful kings hesitated to cross. To violate it was to risk divine condemnation and widespread public outrage. Gloucester, a man of piety and pragmatism, understood this. He sent no soldiers crashing through the abbey's doors. Instead, he applied relentless political and psychological pressure. He dispatched the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Bourchier, to persuade the Queen. The arguments were layered, that it was unseemly for the Duke to be separated from his brother and king, that his presence was required for the upcoming coronation, that his absolute safety was guaranteed. Elizabeth Woodville, cornered and isolated, faced an impossible choice. After intense negotiation, under duress that was a clear threat, she relented. On June 16, 1483, she handed her 9-year-old son over to the Archbishop. Watched by Gloucester's men, the boy was led from the sacred precinct of Westminster to a barge on the Thames. His destination was the Tower of London, to be reunited with his brother. As the tower's formidable gates closed behind him, the two princes were finally together, and both were now under their uncle's power. The sanctuary was broken, and with it, the last shield of the House of York's legitimate heirs. Following the sudden passing of King Edward I on April 9, 1483, the machinery of succession ground into motion. His eldest son, a boy of 12, was proclaimed King Edward V. Tradition dictated the next step, a period of residence within the Tower of London to prepare for his coronation. Accompanied by his younger brother, 9-year-old Richard, Duke of York, the new king entered the formidable fortress not as a captive, but as its royal master. In these early days, the facade of normalcy was meticulously maintained. The princes were housed in the Garden Tower, later known as the Bloody Tower, afforded the comforts befitting their station. They had attendants, tutors, and fine meals served on silver plate. Yet, beyond their gilded chambers, a political tempest was gathering force, orchestrated by their uncle and Lord Protector, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. He acted with chilling efficiency, intercepting the young king's party and arresting his maternal uncle, Anthony Woodville, and half-brother, Richard Grey. This act decisively severed the princes from their mother's powerful family, leaving them entirely under Gloucester's control. The date for the coronation was pushed back, then postponed indefinitely. The Italian chronicler Dominic Mancini, present in London at the time, observed the shift. He wrote that the boys who initially appeared in the tower's gardens to practice archery and play began to retreat from public view. They were seen only at the windows of their apartment, their youthful hope visibly dimming into a profound and silent melancholy. The tower, once a symbol of their impending glory, was slowly revealing its other face, a place of confinement from which few returned. The stones themselves seemed to absorb their freedom, the royal residence becoming a royal prison. By late summer 1483, an unnerving quiet fell over the Tower of London. The final, fleeting sightings of Princes Edward and Richard Playing in the gardens had ceased. Their world, once a royal apartment, had shrunk to a single isolated chamber. Whispers of unease flooded the court. Courtiers exchanged clipped pleasantries and uneasy glances. Servants spoke in hushed tones in shadowed alcoves, their conversations ending when a guard passed. Why had their attendants been dismissed and replaced with men loyal only to the new king? His silence was a tactical wall, as cold and impenetrable as the tower's fortifications. The very stones seemed to absorb the questions, offering back a chilling echo. This absence was more potent than any proclamation. It created a vacuum of information, quickly filled by insidious rumor and speculation from allies and enemies of the new regime. Had the boys been moved for their safety? Were they merely unwell, hidden from public view? Or had a more permanent, unthinkable solution been enacted within those walls? The name of Sir James Tyrrell, a trusted, ruthless servant to King Richard, surfaced in the most secretive conversations, linked to clandestine tasks. He was a man known for unwavering loyalty, who would follow any order without question. The court became a theater of paranoia, where one misplaced word could have dire consequences. The fate of the princes became the unspoken question at the heart of the new reign, a foundational secret threatening to unravel Richard's very claim to the throne. The mystery was no longer just about two missing boys. It was about the stability of a kingdom, teetering on a secret locked in stone and silence. With King Edward IV's death, the political ground in England had become treacherous mire. His brother, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, moved with chilling precision. The key to his ambition lay not in open warfare, but in a devastating legal and moral assault. The instrument of this attack was the Titulus Regis, a formal declaration presented to Parliament. It was a document born of whispers and shadows, given voice by Robert Stillington, the Bishop of Bath and Wells. Stillington claimed that Edward Vere had entered into a pre-contract of marriage with a Lady Eleanor Butler before his union with Elizabeth Woodville. In the eyes of canon law, this rendered his subsequent marriage invalid and, crucially, all his children illegitimate. The two young princes, Edward and Richard, were thus stripped of their royal status, their claim to the throne dissolved by a theological technicality. The lords in the council chamber listened, their faces grim masks in the flickering candlelight. Some were allies of Richard, their expressions set with resolve. Others, loyal to the Woodvilles, felt a cold dread creep into their hearts. This was not a simple power grab. It was a rewriting of history, a branding of the royal heirs as bastards. The proclamation effectively cleared the path for Gloucester. With the princes legally removed from the line of succession, the next legitimate heir, according to this new, terrible logic, was Richard himself. The act was passed, the words were recorded, and the fate of the boys in the tower was sealed not by a sword, but by a scribe's pen and a bishop's testimony. The claim, once made, could never be unsaid, and England was set on a course from which there was no return. The throne was now vacant for a new king. On the 6th of July, 1483, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, processed into Westminster Hall not as Lord Protector, but as the anointed King of England. The path to this moment had been paved with legal maneuvering and political force, but the coronation itself was an affair of magnificent, if hollow, splendor. The air was thick with incense and the sound of solemn chants, yet an undercurrent of tension was palpable. Many of the nobles present had sworn allegiance to the young Edward IV only weeks before. Now, they bowed to his uncle. The crown of St. Edward, a hallowed and heavy symbol of divine right, was placed upon Richard's head. For his supporters, this was a moment of stability restored, a strong hand taking the helm of a ship threatened by the Woodville storm. For his detractors, It was the culmination of a brazen usurpation, a crown of thorns won through betrayal. Richard III's face, as described by contemporary accounts, was a study in solemnity. He played the part of the reluctant king, accepting the burden of rule for the good of the realm. But the weight he accepted was more than just the gold and jewels of the crown. It was the weight of suspicion, the weight of the two boys who remained sequestered within the Tower of London, their existence a constant, silent rebuke to his legitimacy. Every cheer that echoed through the vaulted ceilings of Westminster Hall was shadowed by the question of their fate. Richard had secured the throne, but he had not secured peace. The very act of his coronation, intended to solidify his power, instead planted the seeds of rebellion. He had gained a kingdom, but in doing so, he had made powerful enemies and created a grievance that would ultimately unite them against him. The celebration was grand, but it was the beginning of the end. As the London summer of 1483 waned, so too did the last public sightings of the young Edward Feith and his brother, Richard of Shrewsbury. In the early weeks of their uncle's protectorship, the boys were occasionally seen within the tower's inner ward. The visiting chronicler Dominic Mancini reported that they took to the gardens, practicing archery with a somber diligence. A fleeting image of youthful royalty attempting normalcy within fortress walls. Yet as weeks passed, these appearances became increasingly sporadic. A profound melancholy was said to gravity of his precarious situation. His games became less frequent, his face a mask of quiet apprehension. Then, even these glimpses ceased entirely. The windows to their lodgings, later known grimly as the Bloody Tower, were shuttered and barred from the outside. Their voices were heard no more. A heavy, unnatural silence descended upon their apartments, a complete void more disquieting than any alarm. They were methodically erased from the daily life of the tower. Their personal servants were dismissed, access to their quarters severely restricted, and the princes were swallowed by the very stones of their sanctuary. There was no official announcement from King Richard III's council, no record of illness, no mention of their being moved. They simply ceased to exist in the public record and eye, becoming phantoms in their own kingdom. This creeping, silent removal was a masterful, chilling act of political control. It was a quiet, methodical erasure that left the court in a state of suspended, fearful animation. Courtiers whispered in shadowed alcoves, but no one dared to ask the forbidden question aloud. To inquire after the princes was to question the authority of the new king. The suffocating silence was his most potent weapon. The absence of the boys became a palpable presence, a chilling void at the center of the realm, defining a dark mystery that would haunt the English monarchy for centuries. The crown sat uneasily on Richard III's head. His reign, born from a storm of controversy, was plagued by instability and rebellion. The whispers about the fate of his nephews, the two young princes, were not confined to the tower. They echoed in every shadow of the court, a constant, corrosive poison to his authority. While Richard desperately tried to consolidate his power and project an image of legitimate kingship, a far greater storm was gathering across the Channel. In the courts of Brittany and later France, a forgotten claimant was being forged into a weapon. Henry Tudor, a man with a distant, debated claim to the throne through his mother, Margaret Beaufort, had spent most of his life in exile, a pawn in European politics. He was the last flicker of hope for the Lancastrian cause, a figurehead for all those disenfranchised by Richard's ruthless seizure of power. From England, his formidable mother, a master of political intrigue, secretly wove a complex web of conspiracy. She reached out to disillusioned Yorkists, even forging an unlikely alliance with the former Queen Elizabeth Woodville. The pact was sealed with a promise. Henry would marry her eldest daughter, Elizabeth of York, thus uniting the warring houses of Lancaster and York. This political masterstroke transformed Henry from a mere Lancastrian pretender into a potent symbol of reconciliation, a unifier who could finally end the decades of bloody conflict. Bolstered by this promise and funded by a French court eager to destabilize England, Henry prepared his audacious gamble. He adopted the Red Dragon of Cadwallader, the ancient emblem of Wales, as his standard, a powerful symbol meant to rally his ancestral homeland to his cause. In August 1485, his small fleet set sail. The Tudor dragon was rising, heading for the shores of Wales, on a collision course with the White Boar of York. The fate of the English crown would be decided not in a shadowy tower, but on the open field of battle. The Tower of London, once a royal palace, became a place of whispers. After the summer of 1483, the voices of Edward Feith and his younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, simply ceased. They vanished from public view, their existence erased from official records, leaving a vacuum that was quickly filled by rumor and fear. Richard III's claim to the throne rested on this deafening silence, a reign propped up by an unspoken, unverified tragedy. But the ghosts of the past are patient. For nearly 200 years, the dark fairy tale used by the Tudors to legitimize their own dynasty. What truly happened to the boys? Well, then, in 1674, during renovations under the reign of King Charles II, a stunning discovery was made. As workmen demolished a staircase leading to the chapel in the White Tower, they found a wooden chest buried beneath. Inside, tangled together, were the skeletons of two young children. The location eerily matched the accounts written by Sir Thomas More a century earlier. Convinced that this was the final tragic evidence of the princes' fate, Charles II declared them to be the lost royals. He commissioned an elegant marble urn from Sir Christopher Wren and had the remains interred with honor in Westminster Abbey. The story, it seemed, had found its somber conclusion. However, the finality was an illusion. The urn was opened in 1933 for a scientific examination, but the forensic science of the day offered only tantalizing ambiguity. The bones were consistent with the ages of the princes, but definitive identification was impossible. Today, the debate rages anew. Modern science, specifically DNA analysis, holds the potential to unlock the truth. Yet, requests to re-examine the remains have been consistently denied by the royal household. The silence that began as a political necessity in the 15th century has become a protected mystery, leaving the princes as eternal echoes in the halls of history.